Bereshus Rabbi Adler. I want to thank all of you for coming, and in particular want to welcome and acknowledge the presence of our mother who is here with us this evening. We also want to express a special hakaras hatov to Rinat's Adult Education Committee for all of the great work that it does, for all of the programs that it works on our behalf, and also for giving me an opportunity to share so many thoughts with you over all of these years since we came to Teaneck about 10 years ago. I want to begin with a clip from the National Public Radio the day after our father passed away.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Robert Siegel. The first American rabbi to set foot in the Buchenwald concentration camp after its liberation has died. Rabbi Hershel Schacter was a U.S. Army chaplain during World War II. He went on to a career as a leading modern Orthodox rabbi in New York. NPR's Joel Rose has this remembrance.
Hershel Schacter was a chaplain with General George Patton's troops in Germany, so he was one of the first to enter Buchenwald just hours after it was liberated in April of 1945.
I slowly approached the site of the huge ovens, from which the smoke was still curling upward. I could smell the stench of the charred remnants of human flesh. There were literally hundreds of dead bodies strewn about.
But Schacter turned his attention to the living, as he described years later at a conference organized by the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
The more brave among them slowly began to approach me, to touch my army uniform, to examine the Jewish chaplain's insignia, incredulously asking me again and again, is it true? Is it over?
One of the prisoners Schacter discovered in Buchenwald was a 7-year-old boy named Lulek. He's now Rabbi Israel Meyer Lau, the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. Lau told the story of Schacter's arrival last week to President Barack Obama during his visit to Jerusalem.
He entered into the barracks, crying in Yiddish, "Jews, you are free." We didn't believe. After 6 years of horror, we never believed. This is the opportunity to thank you, to thank the American people who came finally on 1945 April to take us out, not from slavery to freedom, but from death to life.
Schacter led religious services for the Jewish survivors at Buchenwald. He also helped to keep thousands of them alive, and he helped transport nearly 1,000 orphaned children to new lives in Europe and Palestine, including Rabbi Lau and future Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel.
The main thing that to have a Jew uniform, a Jew rabbi, meant something to us. All the uniforms we saw were SS uniforms. And that meant death. Then came Rabbi Schacter, and he spoke on the loudspeaker, and we needed those words.
Hershel Schacter was born in Brooklyn. He attended Yeshiva University, where he was ordained in 1941. After the war, Schacter came back to New York. He led a modern Orthodox synagogue in the Bronx from 1947 until it closed more than 50 years later. Rabbi Schacter was also an advocate for the rights of Soviet Jews and an advisor to President Richard Nixon on the issue. For decades after the war, Schacter said he was haunted by what he had seen in Buchenwald, which the seasoned inmates told him was less brutal than other camps. There were no gas chambers in Buchenwald, only crematoria, Schacter said. And this was the less brutal? How much more gruesome could the other death camps have been? Schacter died last week in the Bronx of natural causes. He was 95 years old. Joel Rose, NPR News, New York.
Our father lived a long and active life. He occupied some of the highest positions of the leadership, not only of the Orthodox community in America, but of the American Jewish community as a whole. But he's most remembered for the work that he did immediately after the Holocaust in just 10 weeks that he spent in the Buchenwald concentration camp April, May, and June of 1945. And it was this experience that earned him an obituary on the front page of the New York Times when he passed away. You have it on page 1, and then the continuation on page 2. If you don't have a handout, please try to sit next to somebody who has one, because we're going to be working off of the sheets for the rest of this presentation. And it also earned him that special commendation in NPR. Our father was born in Brooklyn on October 10th, 1917. He was the youngest of 10 children. His father was a sheichet, hence our last name is Schacter. My father told me that his father was the 7th in a line of shochtim, ben achar ben. My father was the first one to break the chain. I don't know what would have happened to me had he not broken the chain. I'm sure I would have lived a wonderful and very special and happy life. For elementary school, he attended Mesivta Chaim Berlin and Yeshiva Torah V'das for high school. And he developed a reputation as a very powerful speaker as a child. He often told us that when he was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, people would actually bring him to a chasana and put him up on a chair, and under the chuppah, he would deliver a talk to the chassan and the kala. So you can imagine this 8-year-old kid on a chair talking to the chassan and kala about life and about meaning and about relationships. For many years, our family chalked this up to a smidgen of retrospective and perhaps wishful hyperbole. But at the Shiva, a young rabbi actually came and told us that an elderly member of his congregation told him that our father did that at the chuppah of her parents. So we have confirmation. In 1934, at the age of 17, he enrolled in Yeshiva College, and he graduated with the class of 38. He was a student leader at Yeshiva College. I did a search for his name in the archives of the New York Times, and I found about 10 articles in the New York Times from those years, 35, 36, 37, 38, in which his name appears as a speaker at this event or that event, representing the student body at Yeshiva College. He spent the summer of 1936 traveling through the mountains, giving speeches at hotels for Chaim Berlin. If you turn to page 3, there's a letter from the president of Chaim Berlin. He is now 19 years old, and the letter, which we have in our family archives, is meant to introduce the reader to Mr. Hershel Schacter, a former student of our yeshiva. He's 19 years old. He's now at Yeshiva College, who has volunteered to assist our yeshiva in making appeals in the mountain summer resorts. So he decided to spend his summer trying to raise money for his former yeshiva. Mr. Schacter, at the age of 19, is an excellent orator and a very promising student for the rabbinate. He's also authorized to make arrangements with hotel keepers to book dates when appeals should be made in the future. So this is how he's spending his time, and he graduates from college in 1938. During this time, he became very, very close with Rav Yisrael Jacobson, who was a leader of a very small group of Chabad Hasidim in New York. Chabad was very, very small. There was no Rebbe here at the time. And on page 4, it's a fascinating document that shows that our father was a member of a very small group that included some very distinguished leaders of the New York Jewish community that worked to bring the Frierdiker Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, out of the rapidly becoming hell of Europe to come to the United States. If you look in the list of names, H. Schacter, you have the original, it's very small on both sides, on the top of both sides of this page, and his name appears there. And he told us how he tried as a young man, this is now 1940, to try to do what he could. And I think that was his first encounter with the Holocaust in any real kind of a substantive way. He graduated college in 1938, went to Yeshiva Rabbeinu Yitzchak Ochaner for Smicha. He finished in 1941, and he got a job as a rabbi in Stamford, Connecticut. This was a very difficult time at Yeshiva. Dr. Bernard Revel, who was the president, passed away at the end of 1940. Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, who was a Rosh Yeshiva, passed away at the beginning of 1941. And by the time the dust settled, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik became the Rosh Yeshiva. Because of the upheaval in the yeshiva, there was a whole backlog of guys who were waiting to get smicha. And our father told us with great pride over the years how he was the first one who was able to get smicha from Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik. The Rav gave smicha to more rabbis than anyone else in Jewish history. Something like 2,500 rabbis carry a cloth that has Rav Soloveitchik's signature. And our father was very proud that he was the first of that group. And as a result of that, and as a result of further connections, he enjoyed a very close relationship with Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik was the Mesader Kedushin at the wedding of my sister and brother-in-law. He was the Mesader Kedushin at our wedding, even though none of us were his students. This was as an expression of his affection and respect to our father. And then in the summer of 1942, he joined the army. And he told us that the reason why he joined the army was for two reasons. Number one, he wanted to fight Hitler. And number two, he wanted to help Jews. And they were separate from one another. Our father, his whole life, was a major American patriot. He loved America. And he felt that it was his patriotic duty as an American citizen to try to help fight Nazism and help fight Hitler. He also wanted to help Jews, although he had no idea, and no one really in 1942 yet had a clear idea of what it meant to try to help Jews. In December of 1942, he attended chaplain school at Harvard University. He always made sure to tell me that I was not the first one in our family to go to this university. That was something that he made sure to share with me all the time. There were hundreds of students who graduated with him. We actually have a list of all the students who were with him in chaplain school. And at the graduation ceremonies that were held in Temple Ohabei Shalom, which is a very large Reform temple in Brookline, Massachusetts, he was one of the three commencement speakers. And he served in the Army. If you look on page 5, and if you look on page 6, there's some pictures and memorabilia that we have from those years. He was in the United States, so in 1943, he's in New Orleans, and he's presenting a Sefer Torah to the Post Chapel in New Orleans, Louisiana. He's in Brownwood, Texas. We have pictures of him that were taken at that time. And then in September of 1944, on page 6, we have an official Army photograph of a dinner following Rosh Hashanah evening service. So he's the chaplain on the left-hand side. There's a guest chaplain. My father then was a captain. There was a guest captain. You could see from the insignia of his guest that he was a Christian. You could see the cross on his uniform. And the relationship that our father had, interfaith relationships, were very important to him, and he developed them when he was in the Army. He went to the Caribbean for a while. He was in Greenland for a while. And he told us that he kept on pressuring the Army to send him overseas, because he didn't join the Army to travel across the United States and the Caribbean. He joined the Army in order to fight Hitler and to help Jews. And finally, at the end of 1944, they sent him overseas. He was assigned to the 8th Corps headquarters, which included the 3rd Army, that was led by General George Patton. He told us often that he fought in the famous or the infamous Battle of the Bulge, which was at the end of 44, the beginning of 45, constantly moving eastward with frontline American troops across Germany. He told us that he was the only Jewish chaplain at the time, and he wrote and told us how hard it was for him at that time to constantly have to bury 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old Jewish kids who were killed left and right. And not only that, but also to write, as he did religiously, condolence letters to each one of their families. And then he came to Buchenwald. Buchenwald was liberated on April 11th, 1945. The Hebrew equivalent was Chavches Nisan, and Chavches Nisan was this past Friday. So 2 days ago marks the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Buchenwald concentration camp. One of the survivors, whose name is Meyer Glickman, who always told us that he owes his life to our father, called me at home on Friday, 2 days ago. He was looking for my mother. My mother wasn't answering the phone. He wanted to connect with her on this extremely an important day. Our father told us that he got in trouble with his commanding officer. He called him an anti-Semite SOB, who got very angry at him because basically he picked himself up and he left the army and he moved into Buchenwald. Moved into Buchenwald and he stayed in a small room for about 10 weeks. What I want to do is to focus on 5 areas of the work that he did when he was in Buchenwald. And some of them are more heroic, some are less heroic, all of them are extremely important. First, he tended to the spiritual needs of the survivors. So many of you are familiar, and if you just look on page 2, the New York Times, in their obituary, printed that iconic picture. It was on the flyer that the Adult Education Committee put together for tonight's lecture, the iconic picture of the service that he ran in Buchenwald. If you go to Yad Vashem in Yerushalayim and you're on your way out, there's a huge wall. The picture takes up an entire wall. It's become a very significant and important picture. Many people have identified their fathers in this picture. Our own Michael Kastner recognizes his father in this picture. There's actually a website where you can go on and you can identify and put somebody's name next to a little tiny face in the picture. If you turn to page 7, this picture was the cover of a book that was written by a survivor who our father saved. And on the right-hand side is the Nichum Avelim that he sent us. He sent us a letter when our father died, and he expressed how Hamishpacha Schacter B'Artzot Habrit al Ptirat Rabbi Hershel Schacter Mimatzilei Yehudim Mehagedolim Bioter Bizman Melchemet Olam Hashniya Kiblu Tanchumenu. Hamenachem Zalman Cohen Rechov Yerushalayim 49 B'nei Brak Echad Mei HaYeladim Sheharav Azar Lanu B'Buchenwald Germania Block 8B on April 11th, 1945. Ben 15 Shanim Hayiti as Lelo Horim. And a few months later, he went to Israel. If you look on the next page, there is a memoir that I was shown by somebody who was in the camps at that time. More and more over the course of time, more and more memoirs are brought to our attention, handwritten. We just saw the most recent one less than a year ago when Yocheved and I were in Yerushalayim. We went to Yad Vashem, and somebody had just sent in a handwritten memoir from their time in Buchenwald. And all of them make reference to our father. This one is written by a Leo Cram, who wrote this day by day. And if you look at the top of page 8, it's the 20th of April, 1945, Yom Ches L'Cheirut. Every single day, we have the whole memoir. Every single day he wrote it that day, or in the evening, or the next day, but he's referring to the day and the day of freedom. It's not a retrospective story, but it's a story that was written right there. And you have the beautiful Hebrew. It's just amazing how this person was able to do this. He's here in the middle of telling a story about how on that day, and that day was a Friday, I checked and confirmed that the 20th of April, 1945, fell on a Friday, that that night there was going to be davening in the cinema movie house. The iconic picture is in the Kino Zala, the cinema house in the room, the big, huge room in the Buchenwald concentration camps. And he writes that because there were so many different nationalities in the camp, so the Jewish prayer service was scheduled from 6 to 7, and then the communist meeting was going to be from 7 to 8, so that to make room for everybody to do whatever it is that they had to do. And he talks about our father, and he describes how he says he was pleasant and compassionate. He was very much like an East European Jew. Actually, he writes that his father, that is our grandfather, was a Galician. He came from Galicia. He spoke Yiddish nicely, as well as Hebrew with the dialect of Sephardic Jews. Our father spoke modern Hebrew with the dialect, I guess, of Sephardic Jews. So there were 400 Jews who show up, and I still don't know for sure exactly the occasion for that iconic picture. There's all kinds of disagreements. The New York Times says it was on Shavuos. Many people think it was on Pesach Sheni. Maybe it was even on Friday night, 1 or 2 Friday nights after the liberation. It's not clear to me. Someday maybe I'll be able to get to the bottom of it. There were about 400 Jews. He gave them military prayer books. He had prayer books from the army. He distributed to the army whatever he had to distribute, and he gave them all Jewish military prayer books. And they started Kabbalah Shabbos, L'chun Ranana, and all of a sudden in the middle, the camp commander showed up and paid an unannounced visit. Everybody jumped up and was applauding the arrival of the American camp commander, and the commander makes a speech, and our father translates the speech into Yiddish. Yiddish was the language of communication that he used to be able to relate to the survivors. And here, the second part, or the larger part on page 8, is where he picks up in the middle of the speech of the commander, and translated by our father from English to Yiddish. And he says that you were lucky to survive and to see the destruction of your tormentors with your own eyes. He talks to them about having faith in God and strengthening their belief in the Almighty. Every nation has a right to have its own beliefs. And you see here how he refers to that our father introduced him about 5-6 lines down. Dimaot nachlu meirov hanochachim lishmoa divrei hamifaked hanotzri. This is line 5 or 6. Tears were coursing down in most of those who were present to hear the words of the Christian commander. Shaharebi hitzigo v'ti'eroto ke'ohev amiti shel am Yisrael ke'echad mechasidei umot ha'olam. Shuv pa'am, when he finished his speech, then everybody was happy and michiyat kapayim, and they clapped. Acharei atfilah harebi noem neum katzar bo madgishu et kirvata shel hayahadut hame'erikayit el achehem hasovlim be'Europa. So now it's the rabbi's turn. So our father spoke a little bit and told them that there's a tremendous feeling of solidarity between American Jews and those who were the survivors. L'davonam lo hayta le'el yadam ad hayom, la'azor lanu ba'ofen prakti. Regretfully, until today, there wasn't an opportunity. This is just a couple of days after the liberation. There's not been a practical way how to be able to help them. Achata mevakeshu et she'erita pleita shen mimtzeit po, she'ta'azer b'savlanut, hein od po tuchum tzva'i, uzchut habechura nitenet l'chol hatzrachim hatziviyim. The war is still going on. The war was not over yet. The war wasn't over until a couple of weeks later. So my father's explaining to them that they need to have patience. It's a military zone, and priority needs to be given to military purposes. However, soon we're going to try to do whatever we can, and we're going to galvanize the support of American Jewish welfare agencies in order to be able to help you as much as possible. And so one thing that he did was to help them spiritually and to tend to their spiritual needs. If you turn to page 9, there's a Gemara Masachas Sanhedrin that our father shared with us, and I heard from him many times, and over the course of the years I've had a chance myself to share this in his name. Just this past Shabbos, I spent Shabbos at Yeshiva University, and there was a big tish on Friday night, and I reflected on this past week, on the events of Holocaust commemoration, and I shared with them this Gemara and our father's interpretation of this Gemara. The Gemara here on Sadi Beis Amid Beis on page 9 is addressing the question of what happened to the Mesim Shehechiyeh Yecheskel. So we read in the Haftorah at the end of Pesach, on the last day of Pesach, the story about Ezekiel and the dry bones, and their bones, and then the bones become flesh, and then the flesh, and then their sinews, and then their arteries, and then their veins, and it turns into a body, and slowly and slowly and slowly they take shape and they coalesce around a human being. But the Gemara picks up where the Navi leaves off, and the Gemara wants to know, so what happened to these bodies? What happened to these people? And there's a disagreement in the Gemara. The Sanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mesim Shehechiyeh Yecheskel, Amdu al Ragleihem, Va'amru Shira Umesu. They stood up, they expressed their gratitude, and they passed away. Skip a couple of lines. Rabbi Eliezer ben Osho Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Mesim Shehechiyeh Yecheskel, Olu Le'eretz Yisrael, V'nasu Nashim, V'holidu Banim Ubanos. They actually went to Israel, they got married, and they created families. Amad Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira al Ragla v'amar, Ani mi b'nei b'neihem, ich bin an enikol, I am a grandchild, v'halolu tefillin, shehiniach li'aviyabo mehen, and I'm holding on to the tefillin that I have from my grandfather. And our father interpreted this Gemara to address not the Mesim Shehechiyeh Yecheskel in ancient times in the biblical book of Yecheskel, but what about what happened to those who were the survivors, who mamish went through Tchias HaMesim? There are YouTubes of what Buchenwald looked like when the American troops entered. It is hard to describe. It's hard to watch. We're talking about Walking Dead. They mamish had nothing. And slowly and slowly and slowly, with his help and with the help of others, they were nurtured back to life. And then what happened to them? What happened to the Mesim Shehechiyeh, not only in Buchenwald, but in the wake of the Holocaust? And the first category, he said, were those who stood up, Amru Shira Umesu. And he interpreted Umesu that they separated themselves from the future of the Jewish people. They no longer wanted to have a connection with the Jewish people. They were basically done with God, and they were done with Judaism. And he always told us that we can never judge anybody. We could never, ever judge anybody. He told us the story of that night in that picture when he was leading the services in the cinema hall in Buchenwald. In the middle of davening, the guy in the back started to scream and disrupt the service. and he started to scream, and he said, "And zu welcher Gott davenst die? Zu der Gott, was hat reingeworfen dein Mama and Tate in crematorium? To who, to which God are you praying? Are you praying to the God who threw your mother and father into the crematorium?" He was inconsolable. He was absolutely shrieking, and he disrupted the whole davening. And our father told us that he stopped, and he didn't say anything. And he walked over to this man, and he just gave him a hug and just held on to him. And slowly, he began to calm down. Slowly, he began to subside in his upset. And then he just walked back and he continued the davening. Never, ever can we judge anybody who made any decision whatsoever, given what they went through. And there were those who came to a decision that we do not judge for a shred of a millisecond, who decided to refrain from hitching their wagon to the caravan of Jewish peoplehood. And so therefore they removed themselves from the future of Jewish life. And then there's the second category. Rabbi Eliezer ben Osher Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Olu le'eretz Yisrael, v'nasu nashim, v'holidu banim ubanos. They had faith, they had a future, they came to the Holy Land, they came to Israel, they created families, they created a Jewish state, they created a Jewish future. But even that is not the ultimate. For the ultimate, we have to go to the next line. Amad Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira al Ragla va'amar, ani mibnei b'neihem, v'halolu tfilin, shehiniach li, avi abba mehen. And here are the tfilin, to be able to maintain a commitment to Jewish life and to Jewish values and to Jewish tradition and to Jewish religion, and to have tfilin and to care about tfilin and to take those tfilin and pass them on to future generations and to let them know that these tfilin matter to you and these tfilin are important to you. That is the ultimate. So we move from those who, for whatever reason, and we absolutely understand it, decided to move away. And then there are those who were part of the national renaissance of the Jewish people. And then there were those who were continuing in the footsteps of the Bubis and the Zaydis and the Elta Bubis and the Elta Zaydis, those who had a commitment to Jewish life and to Jewish tradition. The story that we heard, her father was very sick for a number of years, and he told us a lot of stories, but there were stories that we found out first after he got sick. And this is a story that we heard a couple of years ago from a fellow by the name of Hershkowitz. Professor Hershkowitz is currently the president of Bar Ilan University, and his father was a survivor. And he told a story that when our father came into Buchenwald, people gathered around, and he said he went from place to place. Many of you read Rabbi Lau's book, and that's where, probably more than anywhere else, this story gained a lot of publicity. He went from barrack to barrack. He got on the loudspeaker. Elie Wiesel mentioned in the NPR trip how, in the NPR little clip, how he got on the loudspeaker, Eden is in frei, and he went from barracks to barracks. And people started to gather around. They didn't know what to make of this, because here he was wearing a uniform. And until yesterday, uniform meant tragedy and meant pain and meant suffering and meant destruction and meant death. And now out of this uniform comes Yiddish, and they simply didn't know how to process it. And there was a group gathering around, larger and larger and larger, and he kept on saying, "What can I do for you? Was kann ich tun für dir? Was kann ich tun für dir?" And finally, a young fellow says, "There's something that you could do for me. Until a month ago, I had tefillin in Buchenwald. And then they caught me and they took away my tefillin." And he said, "You could imagine what they did to me. So it's been a month that I haven't put on tefillin. Maybe you have a pair of tefillin for me." So he says that my father bent into his sack that he had, his army sack, and he took out, he said, his own pair of tefillin, and he gave it to this young fellow, and he gave away his tefillin. And Hershkowitz said that if somebody's ready to give away his own pair of tefillin under these circumstances and to be so self-sacrificial, then this was what motivated him, this professor, to be a rabbi in Haifa, and then to become a minister of the Israeli Knesset, and then to become the president of Bar Ilan University. I keep on thinking, what did my father do for tefillin? I mean, it's a great story, but I'm worried about, like, my father's Olam Haba, like, what did he do? So I'm imagining that, and I know he told us that he had a number, he used to carry around the number of pairs of tefillin. Tama Khalila, there's some GI who's interested in putting on tefillin, and he probably gave him either one of those, or he gave his own, but he still had a spare to be able to use. He carried around a chuppah, a little tiny chuppah, to be able to marry soldiers in case they wanted to get married at some point, and that was used to marry many, many survivors, and not only survivors, but children of survivors and grandchildren of survivors. Our father had a very close relationship with the survivor community, and when there was a chasana, they would invite him, and they would ask him to bring along that chuppah. They wanted that their children and their grandchildren should be married under that chuppah. And every time our father had a bracha to be able to stand for the connection between what was and, Emir Hashem, hopefully, what will be. And so the first category was to tend to the spiritual needs of the survivors. The second category was to tend to the psychological needs of the survivors. I want to read to you, this is not Xeroxed, I didn't copy this, a few little passages from 2 or 3 different books that were written that refer to this particular aspect. It's not the spiritual, it's not the religious, but it's the psychological. It's the humanness. So Rabbi Lau, in his book, after telling the whole story about how he followed our father around and our father discovered him hiding behind a whole pile full of dead bodies, he writes as follows: after visiting all the bunkers, Rabbi Schacter helped me find Naftali. Naftali was his older brother who basically saved him, who regretfully himself just passed away a couple of months ago. We went to the Buchenwald hospital where my brother was being treated for typhoid fever. My name is Hershel Schacter, he said, introducing himself to Naftali. I'm the army rabbi for the division that liberated Buchenwald. He took out several cans of orange juice from his bag. I know who you are. I'm going to help you, and everything will be all right, he reassured Naftali and concluded with a mazel tov. Congratulations, you have gone. Me'avdos lacherus, he said, referring to the story of the Exodus. Naftali names Rabbi Hershel Schacter as the first person to offer him relief after liberation, and says that the rabbi restored his confidence in himself and in humanity. Naftali Lavi himself wrote a memoir, originally Am Kilavi, and it was translated into English as Bilam's Prophecy. And he writes in his memoirs, he became the consul general to the city of New York of the state of Israel in September of 1981. And he writes that my first official acts, when he came to New York representing the state of Israel, were to call on 2 men to whom I felt uniquely indebted. One was New York State Governor Hugh Carey, who as a U.S. Army officer liberated me along with many others from concentration camps in Germany. The second man especially dear to me was Hershel Schacter, rabbi of a congregation in the Bronx. At the end of the war, he was the first, quote, free Jew I beheld after liberation, as he stood beside my hospital bed in Buchenwald when I was recovering from typhus. Even though my mind was foggy from fever at the time, I cannot forget the image of the gleaming metal tablets of the law emblazoned on his military collar, the insignia of a Jewish chaplain. I could not possibly begin my new duties in New York without visiting these 2 men to express my gratitude. Last one comes from a book that just was published a few months ago by a fellow by the name of Martin Greenfield. So I'm not in the geheibene Fenster of fancy clothing, but Martin Greenfield apparently is the leading American maker of hand-tailored menswear, and he provides suits for presidents and for all kinds of very important people. So in his book that was drawn to my attention by a beloved colleague, Rabbi Ari Pearl, he writes about his encounter with our Father. He writes that in 1985, he attended the groundbreaking for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And he's sitting there, and during the ceremony, a rabbi gets up to make some remarks. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. "I know that rabbi from somewhere," I whispered to Arlene, his wife. The rabbi continued speaking. He explained that he had witnessed the Nazi atrocities of the Holocaust firsthand as the chaplain in the U.S. Third Army, which liberated Buchenwald. No way, I thought, it can't be him. And then, as if God himself were winking down at me, the rabbi told a story that I knew well. After the liberation, he recounted, a young boy had asked him a question he could not answer. Where was God? "It's him," I said excitedly to Arlene. After the ceremony, I found a rabbi, Rabbi Schacter. "My name is Martin Greenfield. I was in Buchenwald. I was the little boy who asked you that question." Rabbi Schacter told me he lived in the Bronx. We stayed in touch until his death in 2013. Every time we visited, no matter the occasion, we relived the story together. But standing there at the Holocaust Museum dedication, which had turned into a Buchenwald reunion, with tears streaming down our faces, all we could do was hold on to each other. I didn't want to let go of him. To experience once again that connection, to stand with the man who had held me as a boy when my spirit had been shattered by the Nazis and by their lust for death and darkness. I felt as though I'd been kissed by an angel. So that was the second category, was bringing humanity back. And we're not talking here about piety or religiosity, talking about bringing humanity. The third is he worked very hard to reunite families. We know, we have letters, and we know from other sources that he went to work to try to find families. There were survivors who would come over to him, and they would say, "I have a family here, I have a family there," and nobody knew what happened. "I have a family in the United States," nobody knew what happened. And there's one story in particular, and one person that I want to mention, who became very close to us, to our family, was Ben Bias by us, developed a very dear and close relationship with my parents, and my father and our mother, and my sister and myself. His name was Chaskel Tidor. We called him Dod Chaskel. We called him Uncle Chaskel. He was so close to us. He used to come to us all the time, and my earliest memory of him was when we were walking in the Bronx Botanical Gardens. Our parents lived very close to the Bronx Botanical Gardens. I was a little boy. It's hard for me to imagine now, maybe 7, maybe 8, maybe 9, and we were walking, just the two of us. He took me for a walk, and we were walking on the side of the Bronx Botanical Gardens opposite Fordham University. And I remember exactly Ad Hayom Hazeh, the bench that we were sitting on, and I remember there was a violin playing across the street in Fordham University. And that was the first time when I saw the numbers on his arm. And I said to him, "Dod Chaskel, what are the numbers?" And I don't remember what he said to me. I only remember that whatever he said to me, he said it to me softly, lovingly, sweetly, warmly, and gently. And it's that I remember, the capacity of a person to be able to survive the way he did, with his humanity absolutely intact. One night in the camp, he told our father that he lived in Frankfurt with his wife and 2 children before the war. But he was a Polish citizen, so he was early deported, and he left his family behind. During the next couple of years, he heard from the underground contacts that his wife was killed in a concentration camp, and that his 2 children were placed on a transport and sent to America, but he didn't know anything. And he asked my father, "Please find my children. Find my children in America." He said, "I have no relatives in America, but I heard there's a famous rabbi in America by the name of Rabbi Leo Young. Maybe you could write to Rabbi Leo Young, and Rabbi Leo Young will find them." My father studied with Rabbi Leo Young when he was in college. Rabbi Leo Young was indeed one of the greatest rabbis in America, and I feel that it's important to mention his name because we should never forget him. He was the rabbi of the Jewish Center. I had the privilege of following him when I was at the Jewish Center. He was the rabbi emeritus, and I was the rabbi. He was 60 years older than I was. And when he died, we found a letter from my father to him in Rabbi Young's archives about Dod Chaskel Tidor. The first letter, he writes back and he says, I was not successful. And then we have a letter, and it's printed here, you have it, it's the bottom right of page 10, where my father begs him to try again, to please try again. Maybe you'll be able to find him. And Rabbi Young contacted relevant Jewish agencies. He placed ads in German language newspapers, and he found them. He found the two kids in a foster home in Rochester, New York, and wrote back, and my father ran to Dod Chaskel. We found your children, and they were able to be reunited. It's one story among many stories of families that he tried to reunite. Page 10, there's a picture of him on the top in the Buchenwald concentration camp, and on the left, on the bottom, there's a picture of the barracks. I have the pictures here tonight. These are photographs that were taken in the moment from soldiers who were there at the time. The fourth thing that he did was kibbutz Buchenwald. We're now on page 11. And understand that he was 27 years old. He was 27 years old. He did not yet have the benefit of life with our mother, which is a bracha of massive and monumental proportions, which was a huge bracha for him, and Baruch Hashem continues to be a bracha of massive proportions to our family. He was 27 years old. He pulled all of this off on his own. There's an understory to what happened after the liberation. I'm not going to read it. It's on the left side of page 11. There was a lot of inappropriate behavior that was acted upon by the survivors. There was an unbridled sense of hedonism. They were just free, but free with total hefkerus, and acted out in ways that were immoral and unethical. And the question was what to do. And so a number of more mature young people came to my father, including Chaskel Tidor, and said, you know what, we have a bunch of Zionists who are here. We need to find land in Weimar, that's the largest city next to Buchenwald. We need to find land, and we're going to set up what in Zionist terminology is called a Hachshara collective, and we're going to learn how to make a kibbutz. So we're going to practice here, because we're not able yet to leave, and we're going to play kibbutz. We're going to play Hachshara, and you need to help us find a place. And they came to our father to try to help us. Did Rabbi Schacter have any idea how to implement this plan? The middle of the right side of page 11. The decision to approach Schacter, this comes from a book that was written by Chaskel Tidor's daughter, who is a very prominent Holocaust historian at Bar Ilan University in Israel, Judy Tidor Baumel. The decision to approach Schacter was not an arbitrary one. Ever since Buchenwald's liberation, Schacter's function as a religious guide to Jewish soldiers in the American Eighth Army was slowly being supplanted by an intense concern for the problems of the released concentration camp inmates. Consequently, many of the Jewish activists in Buchenwald saw him as a natural audience for their problems and desires and needs and hopes. Schacter took every query to heart, which earned him a reputation as a savior among hundreds of homeless indigent survivors. Next paragraph, one evening in early May, Schacter met with the commanding officer for Weimar. And he sits down with this guy, and the story is amazing, and he talks him into it. And this guy commandeers some land outside of Buchenwald, and they set up a Hachshara, and they set up a kibbutz. Young, mostly men. There were virtually no women, mostly men, but women joined later when they heard that this was beginning to unfold. And they spent a number of months there, and then slowly made their way to Israel. They broke, many of them, the British blockade in 1947, and with Kom HaMedina, they actually were successful in establishing their own kibbutz. And this also is to the credit of our father, who was able to take care of this and arrange this for them. The last thing that I want to mention about his achievements in Buchenwald is maybe one of the most famous, and that is the transport of children that he arranged for Switzerland. If you look at the top of page 12, there's a picture of United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration workers calling off names as this 6-year-old orphan. You see this little 6-year-old, no mother, no father, little children. He's waiting for his name. He's a group of 350 orphans scheduled for departure to Switzerland. The children 5 to 18 years old are all orphans of the war. And the bottom, and it didn't come out well in the copying, is again a photograph taken mamish on that day when the train was getting ready to leave. It's a picture of, and this is my father's handwriting on the right-hand side, boarding train from Buchenwald to Switzerland. There are many extraordinary, heroic stories of our father surrounding this train, but suffice it to say that he was successful in rehabilitating hundreds of young people, and even young people who didn't want to be rehabilitated in the way that he had hoped that they would be. There were some who wanted to just stay in Germany and just wanted to assimilate. They wanted to intermarry. They were done. They were finished with Jewish life and Jewish tradition. He got them on the train. He got them to Switzerland. He inspired them to continue to live Jewish lives. And one family in particular, very close to our family, who directly credits our father for bringing him back not only to life, but to Jewish life. And now Baruch Hashem has a family of multiple generations, all of whom are committed to Torah and to mitzvahs. There was a mother with 2 children who he smuggled onto the train. This was only for little kids, but there was a mother with 2 children. Her name was Peppy Berger, Aleh Shalom. She died at the age of over 100 just a couple of years ago. And snuggled her onto the train, locked her in the bathroom, told her not to open the door under any circumstances. There were many more people on the train than the Swiss gave permission. He went with Chaskel Tidor, who was a printer, and they forged a lot of certificates, and they kept on passing it to the nurse who was the Swiss representative, and after a while she became overwhelmed because there were many more people getting onto this train than was supposed to. The train was stopped at the Swiss border. He threw a fit, and Baruch Hashem, they were able to go in. Peppy Berger has now a family of, I think, about 150 descendants, and every time they have a family gathering, they tell the story about how our father saved their great-great-grandmother's life and their grandmother's life. And there are many such stories. For a long time, we knew most of these stories. There was one part of the Buchenwald experience that I didn't grasp until I got the letter on page 13. When we were sitting Shiva, there was an outpouring of letters and emails and phone calls. And we got a letter that was appended to an email that was written by a grandfather of a friend of ours who was a medic who wrote about going into Buchenwald. And our friend wanted to show us the letter of his grandfather because it was very relevant to the whole Buchenwald experience. And I discovered something that I had never realized before that catapulted our father's heroism to a whole new level. It's dated April 21st, 1945, so that's Yom Tes Lecherus. I made a trip to Buchenwald concentration camp near Weimar yesterday. And he tells a long story here, I don't have time to read it. I want to pick up a little bit more than halfway down the next paragraph. I walked into a barracks. There were hundreds of humans of all ages, all eyes, nothing else. This is an eyewitness first-hand account. Nothing else, just hundreds of sickly, glistening, expressionless eyes staring at you. The rest of the body is just a skeleton, literally, except for swollen feet. A feeble squeak of jubilation and a baby-like clapping of hands greeted us. God, how they all looked alike, all alike. All the same size, the same appearance, the same big ears, wrinkles, age, eyes all identical, reduced to the common denominator. I couldn't see any more, for my eyes filmed. My nose revolted to the stench. I had to run from there. I couldn't bring myself to take a picture there, though my camera was cocked. It is like photographing a defecation. Stop it, I can't hear it anymore. Let me out of here. I rushed outside of the gate. Final paragraph, I ran away. It was too much for one day, the worst 2 hours I spent in my life. I never thought of the stench. And here's a medic who couldn't stand the stench and had to run away. And our father moved in for 10 weeks. And 10 weeks, he lived with them day and night in order to be able to help them. Our father went on to live a long and distinguished life. He was a pulpit rabbi in the Bronx for over 50 years. He had enormous impact on dozens and dozens and dozens of families, some of whom are here tonight. He was the president of the Religious Zionists of America, Mizrachi Apola Mizrachi. He was the first Orthodox chairman of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations. He was the founding chairman of the American Jewish Conference on Soviet Jewry. He was the chairman of the Chaplaincy Commission of the Jewish Welfare Board. He was chairman of the Holocaust Commission of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York City. He was president of the Rabbinic Alumni of Yeshiva University. He was a member of the first delegation of American rabbis to go behind the Iron Curtain and visit the Soviet Union in 1956. He was invited by the United States government to go to Hungary and accompany a group of Hungarian refugees, including the Skolena Rebbe, to come to the United States, also in 1956, and more and more. But he is most remembered, certainly publicly, that merited him the NPR clip and merited him to have his obituary on the front page of the New York Times for what he did in those 10 weeks, starting 70 years ago, this past Friday, in that dark place on earth that he always called the hellhole of Buchenwald. My sister Miriam, a couple of months ago, spoke in honor of our father, and I want to read a little bit of what it was that she said. Reflecting on his life, his challenges and his accomplishments, especially in his early adulthood, he was 27 years old, has always left me feeling woefully inadequate. How could I, his daughter, ever accomplish anything remotely comparable? How could I embody his values, live by them, and extend his legacy? He lived in a very specific time in Jewish history, when so much Jewish tragedy was part of his and all Jews' everyday life. Tati's greatness, in our family we called our father Tati. Tati's greatness was that he stepped up and he took action. He made his people's tragedy his own. He believed that his actions could make a difference. He believed the world could be a better place if we worked at it. He believed that God's presence could be felt in the world if we brought God into our lives. Tati left for us in our family, to me, to my children, to my brother and his children and his grandchildren, a legacy of bravery, compassion, and activism. Each in our own ways, we try to continue his work. Each in our own way, we try and emulate this larger-than-life man. Tati is gegangen helfen Jeden. Tati has gone to help Jews, is the refrain of our childhood. When my brother and I were very little, and Tati wasn't at home, we would say to Mommy, Mommy, wie is Tati? And Mommy would say, Tati is gegangen, helfen Jiden. Tati went to help Jews. And so we too, in our father's memory, in our family, try to follow in his footsteps. We too have to go. We too have to help. We too want to go to help Yidden. I want to conclude on page 14 with the thought that I heard at our Shabbos table 3 weeks ago from my beloved friend, David Jacobowitz. David was sitting at our Shabbos table, it was Parshas Tzav, and he said that he read something that he believes was the hesped that Reb Meir Shapiro, the Lubliner Rav, gave for the Chafetz Chaim. Parshas Tzav, page 14. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar. Tzav esaron ve'ezbanav Lemar zos Torah ha'olah. The Torah here at the beginning of Vayikra is talking about the burnt offering, talking about the Korban Olah. This is the law of the Olah, which is brought as a flame on the Mizbeach a whole night, and it's continuing to burn on the Mizbeach. The Kohen dons the big day kahuna. And he picks up the ashes that were consumed by the fire of the Olah on the Mizbeach, and he puts them near the Mizbeach. And then he removes one set of clothing and he puts on another set of clothing. And he takes out Veherim Isadesh and he removes the ashes. Michutz lamachne el makom tahar. V'ha'esh al ha'mizbeach tukad bo. Lo svichbe, the fire remains on the Mizbeach and it will not be extinguished. This I would like to conclude, and I thank David, resonates very deeply for our father. There was an Olah that was burning in the Jewish world. Kol halaylo, it was a long dark night, and the fire was burning, and 6 million Jews were consumed by that fire. And it kept on burning, and it was horrific, and it was hot, and it was dangerous, and it was tragic, and it was catastrophic. And then V'lav HaShakohen, then the army chaplain comes and puts on a uniform, puts on the uniform of an American army officer, Veherim Isadeshen, and he goes overseas and he lifts up the ashes. He tries to elevate the ashes. Asher tochal ha'esh es ha'olah ala mizbeach. V'samo etz ala mizbeach, and he takes the remnants of the Jews that he met and encountered in those 10 weeks, and he tries to pick them up. And he tries to bring them to the Mizbeach, to bring them closer to Jewish life. And then he lives a long life. And then upashad es begadav, his earthly clothing are removed. I remember one day, and I don't remember when exactly, I don't know how old I was, maybe 18, 19, 20. I was walking with Tati from our house to the shul, to the Marshallu Jewish Center. We were walking down Marshallu Parkway. We were having conversations, and at one point he says to me, he says that when my father died, the Chevra Kadisha called me in and asked me, and they honored me by tying the little strip of clothing around his ankles for his tachrichem. So you know that there's a Chevra Kadisha, you know that their tachrichem, their pants, the tachrichem pants, they have no opening. It goes over the feet. And then there's a minig to take like a little bit of material and tie around the ankles. He said to me, JJ, when the time comes, I would like for you to do this for me. I never forgot it, I think, because I was very much taken aback. I think it's very hard for a child to contemplate the death of a parent. I remember exactly where in the street we were. And I never said anything. And I never forgot it. And the night before the funeral, I called Miriam, and I said, Miriam, we're a team, we're a family. Tati asked me to do this, we're going to do it together. So the next morning, Yocheved and I and Benji and Mir, we got up early. We went down to Riverside Memorial Chapel at 7 o'clock in the morning. We waited around for a couple of minutes. The tzaddikim and malachim of the Chevra Kadisha, of the Revealed Jewish Center, were doing their job. And then they said, it's okay, you can come down. The 4 of us came down. We took the little bindle We tied it around his feet. So Pashat es begadav, he got rid of his earthly clothes. V'lavash begadim acherim, and he put on other clothes. He put on the clothes that accompany him into eternity. V'hotzi es hadesheno michutz lamachne el makom tahor. And the legacy that he left of what he did to those ashes continued to be by a makom tahor. V'ha'esh al hamizbeach tukad bo lo sechbeh. And the fire that he burnt in the lives of so many to have a commitment to Jews, to Israel, to Torah, to mitzvahs, to humanity, will not be extinguished. And this is the legacy of his life. We mark now 70 years. The number 70 is Gematria Ha'aveda Hagidola. Ha'aveda Hagidola. The massive loss is 70 years. 70 is also the Gematria Vayavo Hagoel. And the Redeemer came. The Redeemer came in the form of our Father. And he addressed himself in 10 weeks. What a person can accomplish in 10 weeks to the Aveda HaGedolah. And he turned Aveda Gedolah into an Eish al HaMizbeach Tukad Bo Lo Sechbeh. Rav Tzvi ben Rav Pinchas uMiriam Tehei Nishma Sotzur B'Tzaror HaChaim. Thank you very much for coming.
If I can just say one thing, have you 30 seconds. I want to thank Rabbi Schacter for giving us an opportunity to fulfill that which we read just yesterday in Parsha Shmini, V'chol Beis Yisrael Yivku et HaSreifa Hazot. At the time referring to the death of Nadav and Avihu, but forever Parsha Shmini always comes either the Shabbos before Yom HaShoah or the Shabbos after Yom HaShoah, every single year in our calendar. And to read those words, V'chol Beit Yisrael Yivku et HaSreifa Hazot, and to give us a glimpse as to what it meant to live and to make an effort to bring back to life those She'erit HaPleitah was something that we'll never forget. And in conclusion with the Haftarah which we read yesterday, yes, Vayomer lo Yehonasan Machar Chodesh. There's always going to be a future for Klal Yisrael. The renewal of the month always signifies the fact that no matter who tries to destroy us, HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides Matzilenu mi'adam, and we hope that we'll continue to grow stronger and stronger. And at the end of the Haftarah, David and Yehona's son take an oath to one another. And Rabbi JJ and Yocheved, I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here, as your friend. And I'm going to do the same thing. Asher nishbanu shneinu b'shem Hashem leimor. Hashem yiyeh beini ubeinecha, representing everybody here. The friendship and the expressions of love and the way you heighten our educational and religious experience is something that hopefully will remain with you and with us for many years to come. And indeed, may your father's memory Yehi Zichro Baruch.